Today, on a unassuming Wednesday, we have had an absolute bombshell dropped on us here in the Australian rugby landscape with the announcement of two Wallabies coaches. No, not at the same time. Rather, we're going to have the extension of Joe Schmidt for another 8 to 9 months. Kind of unclear on that delineation. A lot of people saying 8, a lot of people saying 9, but it is until July 2026. And then we'll have Les Kiss, the current Queensland Reds coach, taking over midway through next year. It's super exciting. Here on Off the Rock, we are absolutely over the moon with what has been an absolutely it's kept us on tenterhooks waiting for this announcement, and now finally we have it. And I actually feel, and I think co-host here Finn thinks the same, that it is a really good announcement. But Finn, you were actually at the presser representing the one member of the one member of the pod because I couldn't get there. But you were there in your working capacity. What was it like seeing Les Kiss, Joe Schmidt side by side, along with RA CEO Phil Waugh, and obviously Peter Horn, the man of high performance? So what was that like there in rainy Sydney?
Yeah, I was going to touch on the rain actually initially because I don't want to say there were nerves there from a media point of view, but it was bucketing down, and the fact Rugby Australia decided to do an outdoor press conference on level four at Allianz Stadium, we were pretty nervy before Kissy and the others walked out about whether we'd be able to hear each other. I think I even suggested to someone, should we change this into a stand up? Like it was, yeah, it was coming down pretty hard, but. There were grey clouds, and then Les Kiss sits down along with the other three, and that's when the sunlight begins to pierce through the clouds, Fergo, pierce through the grey. The dawn of a new era. There's hope for Australian rugby, and there's a reason to be positive. And it was actually really refreshing and really nice to see how positive and how happy all four members were. Kissy was cracking jokes. He even said something about his favorite type of chips at
Yeah,
one
big
point.
twisties, man.
Big,
Joe
big
Schmidt,
twisties, man.
who would have guessed that he's a plain chip kind of guy?
I think, yeah, it's pretty short odds. He's a pretty cool customer, Schmitty. But yeah, I think Kissy was making jokes, but he was also it was actually really nice to see him almost frantically looking around while he was answering questions, referring to the other three, and really making it clear that this is a collaborative process and that he might be stepping into the hot seat mid next year, from July 2026 or after July 2026. But it's still very much he's taking over the reins from Joe. He's not replacing Joe, if that makes sense. So if you can figure out the difference there, he's building on building on the foundations that Joe's laid, and working with Phil Waugh and Peter Horn to do that. So they're very similar coaches, how they approach the game. They've worked together before, obviously at Ireland, winning Six Nations and having other successes there. But for Kiss, this is his first time as a head coach of a test team. And there is a little known tournament called the Rugby World Cup coming up in 2027 here in Australia. The Wallabies are basically only going to have a year as a run in with their head coach to build into that. So will it be a repeat of what we saw in 2023 with Eddie Jones coming in 9 months before the World Cup? Hopefully not. Hopefully there is enough time for Kissy to get this team up to speed and to, like I said, build on what Joe's laid down foundation wise.
Yeah, and I think what you touch on there, the short run and the Kiss has had, is something that a lot of people, a lot of the punters have been kind of concerned about and wanting to speed up that timeline and wanting to know. I'm actually really impressed that RA have resisted the pressure of needing to be on a timeline to be able to get some sort of result out to the people and the media. I think that they've landed at a really rational decision and result, which makes a whole lot of sense from a succession plan. And this is the first time Australia has had a succession plan since Rod McQueen and Eddie Jones in those moments when you spoke about prior to the last World Cup at the turn of the century there. So that is extremely exciting. It's also kind of flabbergasts me that it's taken that long to get the ducks in a row and to be able to get a congenial moment like this at the top level. But you know, they are good mates. How would you describe Joe Schmidt's demeanor sitting next to his good friend Les Kiss, his successor, his older successor, which is funny enough, he's older than Joe Schmidt. How did Schmidt seem there at the presser?
Schmidt's always been like a headmaster, hasn't he? The way he conducts himself, he's very direct and almost careful about what he says, like in a good way. He's very knowledgeable about the game, and he wants to make sure he articulates it the right way. And as a member of the media who's been at many press conferences with Joe Schmidt, I do appreciate that. Appreciate the fact that he gives long-winded answers which have a point, and he's not just rambling. He's actually giving you valuable information. Joe, he was pretty smiley. He's pretty happy, and I think he's at peace and he's happy with this outcome. Um, Even if we go back 12 months at Allianz Stadium when I was at the press conference for when Schmidt was announced, there was this feeling that, I walked out of the press conference that day, January, just about a week before the Perth Sevens, I think it was, and telling other journalists, I can't see Schmidt staying on beyond the lines. That's the vibe I got from that press conference. And he's obviously got things back home in New Zealand, family-wise, that he wants to attend to. And there's things that are more important than rugby. Dare I say, that's quite blasphemous to say, but bear with me, Fergo.
No,
But
absolutely,
it,
absolutely.
it is absolutely the case. All jokes aside, he wants to get back and be with his family, and um, likely won't stay on as a head coach going elsewhere. I think that's what he suggested during the press conference, that his days as a head coach of the Test team are over. And but yeah, it's the flip side of that. This is a new journey for Les Kiss. He's come through rugby league, and he's gone to South Africa. He's gone to Ireland. He's really a bit of a coaching journeyman in rugby union. But now's his chance, and it's the ultimate honour. I think that's what he said in his press release, to be the head coach of the Wallabies. And what a time to do it, because there's no better time for Australian rugby than now when it comes to the revival of this game. And what an exciting few years we have ahead with the Lions, Men's World Cup, Women's World Cup. It's a pretty good time to be an Australian rugby fan.
Yeah, absolutely. It is awesome to see things being held quite civil at the top level, and then also some really decent talent starting to perform quite well at all levels. If you go back to the Northern Hemisphere tour last year into this Super Rugby Pacific campaign, it's been pretty good considering the debacle that we had the year prior. But on Les Kiss, people will now want to know what is his approach going to be, or what is his involvement going to be leading up until the time when he actually takes over. And from what I've heard on Stan Sports with Michael Atkinson's little mini interview with him there, the one-on-one that he has there, it says that he'll be pretty much hands-free until the time that he ceases to work with the Reds, purely out of respect and also a clash of commitments. And he's not wanting to cross those lines. And I think that's quite an admirable stance to take, because it'd be very easy for him to jump on the bandwagon and want to get his hands on the Wallabies, and want to be really part of that ecosystem. But likewise, he has a very good friend, as you've pointed out earlier, in Joe Schmidt, who he trusts. And I think that trust is extremely important. And that is probably where, as you described Les Kiss being in the press conference, looking around for reassurance, and whether he's kind of towing the line. If they'd pick someone like Michael Checker, that is not the kind of thing that would have been happening. He's a much more individual, prickly customer. And that's probably why they didn't go down the Michael Checker route initially. And now they've got Les Kiss, and they've got similarities in their coaching abilities. And then obviously that feeds into selection questions. So, what can you tell us about the selection question heading into this year after the British and Irish Lions?
Well, I guess just as a start, I asked Les Kiss that question myself during the press conference about his involvement with, the Wallabies over the next year or so. And, he surprised me, to be honest, basically saying he's going to be hands off, like you said, Fergo. And he sounds like he told Atco the same thing, because it would make sense, wouldn't it? For him, before he takes on this job, to come into Wallabies camp every once in a while and at least try and pick Joe's brain or try and shadow Joe. But I'm sure those decisions, if they're going to change, those discussions will be had later on. So, but selection wise, yeah, it's look, very much the same. I think, what actually stood out to me selection wise. I don't think this is where you're going with the question, Fergo, but actually Joe was asked about Noel Olosio, and that was the first time we got an answer about that. So I think I'll just get ahead and say that actually. But it really does seem like Noah won't be playing for the Wallabies this year. That was the vibe I got. Unless, I think what Joe said was, unless he's clearly outperforming other players in his position by a decent margin. If he's clearly the number one, then Joe will have no choice but to pick him. But Joe wants to reward players who are playing in Australia. So I think that's interesting, and yeah, what that can mean for this Wallabies team come the Lions. But Yeah, I think afterwards, Kissie's not going to change too much. When he does step into the hot seat, they approach the game in very similar ways, Joe and Les. So I don't think there's going to be too much chopping or changing, which I think will come as a relief to the current crop of Wallabies.
Yeah, and he also name dropped a couple of other players in amongst there with Noel Lucia, who mentioned Tom Hooper, Langy Gleeson. So that's quite imperative, really, for when it comes to selection window. Now, when you start looking at players like that, have Tom Hooper and Langy Gleeson necessarily played better or just,
Well,
significantly better than their competitors? So
Tom Hooper, I haven't actually seen the ladder over the last 2 weeks, but he was second on MVP ladder a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if he still is. I don't think he is. Actually, I think he's fallen behind
I think
the likes
Artie's
of
up there now.
Carlo. Sorry.
I think Artie's up there as well.
Oh no, Artie's number one.
Yeah,
Artie is
yeah,
definitely not
yeah.
number one, but I think Tom's fallen behind the likes of Carlo and Tapanawai. But Tom Hooper, if he's clearly, he's got a good batting average in terms of player
Mm,
voting, then how can you say no? But that being said, I don't think he quite fits into the Wallabies when you consider
mm.
other back rowers in the country. So, but yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
See how it all plays out. Look, there was a lot that was said in this press conference today. It went for an hour.
Mm.
So thank God it did stop raining because it would have been
Yeah.
a bit of a grind otherwise. But and everyone was pretty glued to it too. And I think that's the coolest thing is this really did feel like another momentous moment for Australian rugby. Like again, we've had a lot of these press conferences recently. Of Eddie Jones is appointed, Joe Schmidt's appointed, now Liz Kiss is appointed. But this one feels like, look, there's a plan here. There's a plan and it's going to pay off. It might not pay off with a World Cup winners medal draped around Les Kiss's neck or Wallabies players' necks, but there's a reason to be optimistic about this team is building in the right direction. And this is the best thing for the Wallabies and for Joe Schmidt as well, who, like I said, he's got other things that he wants to attend to.
Mm. And one of the things that was said during the press conference was around the captaincy, because we've all been wanting to know who the face of this Wallabies side that's going to face the British and Irish Lions is going to be. And Joe Schmidt has remained purposefully so mute in the lead up to the announcement of this coaching announcement because he didn't want to be mucking and stirring whilst this was happening. But then it was crucial that we have a voice and a face for the British and Irish Lions, which is exactly like a little bit over 2 months away. It is so quickly approaching, and we need a face for that. So we have Joe Schmidt now, but as far as a captain go, he said that he needs to get selection right before he refers back to the coaching group to then be able to arrive at a pinpoint person to be able to appoint captain. And I think that speaks to the acknowledgement of the turmoil that's been in the side, but also to the fact that very few players are walk-up starters. You could probably say Fraser McWright was one of those players in the past, Rob Valentini, Angus Bell, but then how many of those walk-up starters are guaranteed to be leadership quality? And then all of a sudden you're saying that, you know what, as much as we'd like a face for the captaincy for the Wallabies heading into this series, there doesn't appear to be a person that stands out and head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many Wallabies captains over the last few years. Figo, I think you or I might be next. But I think in all likelihood, he did name drop Joe. He did name drop a few players, including Harry Wilson, who is the incumbent, which is crazy because 12 months ago Harry Wilson was in Test rugby, exile, wilderness, wasn't he? He hadn't played in a few years, so for him to be the captain now, incumbent, potentially the front runner to hold on to that spot too. Liam Wright captained the Wallabies last July against Wales and Sydney, but basically hasn't played rugby since. He's played a couple of games for the Reds before re-aggravating that shoulder injury. Alan Alatoa, another strong contender, captain of the Brumbies. James Slipper, Tate McDermott's captained the Reds in the past. Well, captained the Reds, but also the Wallabies. Fraser McWright, former junior Wallabies captain. I think that makes sense to me, to be honest, because if you those names you just listed off, Fergo, of guys who are automatic selections, Fraser's one of them, and it seems like a matter of when, not if, Fraser will get the captaincy at Test level. But maybe that's a story for another day. But yeah, I don't know if it's the best thing for the Wallabies that it seems to be ever changing. You
Mm,
need a leader, you need someone you can always look towards. Richie McCaw defined a period of unprecedented success, or at the time unprecedented success in Test rugby with New Zealand. just how he was always the man to look to for new players coming into that group. You look at the Springboks nowadays, Siya Kolisi, he plays that role. Even Eben Etzebeth, who stepped up as captain in Khaleesi's absence during the TRC last year. There's you need a leader to usher in that next generation and to inspire you into greatness. At the moment, the Wallabies don't quite have that man set in stone, and they need to. And hopefully, if Les Kiss is going to come in and change anything, it's that the Wallabies always have a consistent skipper.
Yeah, let's the fingers crossed. Let's see what happens with Joe Schmidt during the Lions series regarding captaincy. Same for TRC, and then onto the Les Kiss era in a little bit over a year's time. I think the last thing only to note is that Christy Doran from the Raw is reporting that Les Kiss could very well be signing on to 2028, so the end of 2028, and that gives
Oh,
stability post the World Cup.
yeah, that's not a Christie exclusive or anything. That's yeah, that's the case. Yeah,
That's
Les
well,
Kiss is
that's
signed
good
on
to
until
hear because we
2028.
have players, signing on to the end of 2027, et cetera, et cetera. It'll be good to know that for the RA when they're making signings that they can point to a head coach saying, "We've got this person past the World Cup. Make sure that." I mean, if you like him and you like the way that the cut of his jib, then don't worry, he's going to be sticking around because that's been vitally important and something that hasn't been available to players to be able to consider when they're weighing up whether to go overseas or to play in Australia.
Yeah, well, that was actually referenced today to jump back a little bit to talk about Noah Lolesio. I forgot which journo brought it up, but someone mentioned that, when Noah did sign that deal in Japan, he at a press conference did discuss the fact that the coaching frustration was kind of part of the reason why he's decided to head offshore. And now that Joe's decided to re-sign for the year that Noah's supposed to be away anyway, that's maybe going to leave Noah a little bit frustrated. So Joe is going to go speak to Noah at some point. At least that's what he said today. But look, having Kiss sign on until 2028 is great. It's a bit unique to have a coach re-sign a year after a World Cup as opposed to just ending at the World Cup cycle and reassessing. But like you said, Fergo, I think it's a good thing overall. And hopefully there's a few more players who have re-signed with Rugby Australia, and that'll be announced in due course as well.
And I think that's where we're going to leave the chat for tonight. There's been a whole lot of information. You've processed a whole hour worth of presser and I think a year's worth of rain in some parts of the world. So you go off and dry off and rest the big brain of yours. But for Off the Ruck people, we'll be back next week where we wrap up all the action in round 12 in Super Rugby Pacific. If there's any news between there or between now and then that you want us to touch on, you know where to reach us. I'll put them up here so you can reach us at these social media outlets or even here below the YouTube video. We'll get to them. We'll make sure to keep you guys in the loop. That'll be releasing Monday night. Weekly, and that means that guys will know when you can get this kind of content which you're after. This is a special little episode because we got news dumped on our heads today. But Finn, anything to finishing off from you, mate?
Yeah, I actually just want to add some big news actually, and I do need to address something. I know there's been some more chatter about what Super Rugby team I support, and I'm not going to have it. It's just it shouldn't be public knowledge. So anyway, looking forward to see how the Hurricanes go against the Chiefs this week. But yeah, I think who I support, that's going to remain a mystery.
Well, there you go, international man of mystery, or just international man. We'll see. I'll say no more on that. Until next time, guys. Enjoy your rugby. Enjoy the weekend. Ciao for now.